And I'm really looking forward to close this little series off with one of the most profound voices on China retail. And it's going to be Ed Sander, who is joining me on the show. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you, Sven. Good to be back.
Cheftreff, wo Zahlen zählen und Strategie liefern muss. Sven Rittau im Dialog mit den Machern des Handels. Das Original aus dem K5-Universum.
Yeah, and and we have to clarify. You're now flying under a new flag, your own flag, and but you're doing even a better job from my perspective so far. So just tell us where you're landed right now.
Yeah, so for the past 3.5 years, I've been doing reports, like 1 monthly, sometimes 2 monthly reports, really deep dives for TechBus China. But I've just launched like 1.5 months ago, I've launched China Digital Retail Report, where I will continue to write about Temu, Meituan, Shein, all of those companies. But I will still continue to publish one deep dive report every month, but I will also make weekly posts where I take things that I read in the Chinese media and share the highlights and summaries and with my own comments on that. So it's going to be more frequent, whereas at the same time, the good stuff that I did for TechBus China will also still be there.
Yeah, so it's like a combination of like a freemium model, right? You have like free content stuff out there, but the most valuable pieces are going to be on a subscription basis, which is, from my perspective, like the super bargain cheap price. It's something like, for a yearly annual subscription, it's like $150, right?
Yeah, correct. So, and that's specifically for, on the one hand, those deep dive reports, which were also paid content on TechBus China, because they really take a lot of research. They take about, on average, 2 weeks of research. The other pieces are still very valuable because it will contain a lot of things that you would normally not read in English or in German media, German language media. But it is more like public information. So that's like the free content, and the paid content is like the really exclusive stuff that we mostly get from expert interviews with people around these Chinese internet companies.
Yeah. So, and after this little commercial break, I would really like to show why this is worthwhile, like subscribing to, and why actually everybody here in the retail and e-commerce space should listen to this episode. And I would like to circle back quickly to the 5 other episodes I've conducted here. I mean, I had Ali Yaber on it, who is basically running creator economy business in China with Pamela Reeve. I had Kaiser Kuo, who was recommended by you, and we were covering the engineering state, so-called thing, and China, why they are successful on a more governmental level. We had Thomas and Damien here, both hosting the Made in China podcast. We talked about China's speed and ambition from the Shanghai perspective. And Fabian Overhand, there was the topic Creator Content Commerce Triangle. And last but not least, I had a very great dialogue with Olivia Plotnick, and she did something very unique. She covered 32 cities in 60 days, and we were really diving deep into consumer behavior on various levels in China. But what's still missing from my perspective is a primary source perspective that balances, on the one hand, the old Western ignorance and disbelief on the Chinese success, and on the other hand, the new China maxing enthusiasm scheme, and I think, I mean, we spoke before, of course, and you said that there is a Chinese saying there. That there are a lot of, and I can quote that, like useful idiots out there who seem to believe most of the China knowledge or what they put out there is more or less a PR stunt. And my question to you to start off is, Ed, why does that matter? Why is that dangerous from your perspective?
Yeah. So like you said, we've seen in recent years, like the pendulum has almost completely swung from China bashing and people being very negative about China. That basically started happening in around 2018, also with the first Trump administration, and you had COVID, etc., etc. You had the whole Uyghur problem. So very negative sentiment towards China, and that swung all the way, not for everybody, of course, but for a majority of people, to China maxing. Whereas China seems to be like the new promised land where the grass is always greener. And I think that is both extremes are not very much what reality is like in China. So I've also always said you have panda huggers and you have dragon slayers. You should be in the middle. You shouldn't be a panda hugger. You shouldn't be a dragon slayer as well. I think you talked with Kaiser about this as well. So what happened in the last couple of years is, first of all, last year you had in the US that they were planning to shut down TikTok. And people were looking for a different platform. And somehow they ended up on the Chinese platform Xiaohongshu, which is called Red Note in English. And then they saw a lot of video content. They were also welcomed by the Chinese people. The Chinese people were also very curious because they don't have a lot of interaction because of the Great Firewall that they have in China. All of the Western social media platforms are basically blocked for them. So it was very interesting for them as well to see all of these Americans coming in. But what the Americans then got to see is like the beautiful, shiny side of China. They saw the videos of the amazing skylines of Shanghai, drone shows in Shenzhen, crazy videos about the 3D, or as they call it themselves, the 8D city of Chongqing. So you see a certain very developed part of China. Now, what happened after that is last year, there was this American influencer, I Know Speed, is the handle that he uses, that went to China and traveled all around China. And it was a very orchestrated affair where the government was really a lot involved to show him all of the cool sides of China.
Der E-Commerce dreht sich unfassbar schnell. Also warum warten, bis die Trends an dir vorbeiziehen? Am 23. und 24. Juni wird Berlin wieder zum Epizentrum für alle, die Handel gestalten wollen. Ob C-Level-Networking oder praxisnahe Keynotes, Sessions und Masterclasses zu Asien, KI oder Live- und Social Commerce und natürlich noch vielen weiteren Themen, die dich bewegen. Auf der K5-Konferenz findest du die Orientierung, die du heute brauchst. Also why wait? Auch auf den Ticketkauf. Denn nur noch bis zum 31. März sicherst du dir den maximalen Preisvorteil. Als Retailer sparst du satte 350 € gegenüber dem Fullpreis. Für Service-Provider und Partner ist die Ersparnis mit 500 € sogar noch höher. Und mein Special-Tipp an alle Händlerteams: ab 3 Personen zahlt ihr dauerhaft nur 499 € pro Ticket. Sichere dir jetzt deinen Wissens- und Netzwerkvorsprung und bares Geld. Den Link zum Ticketshop findest du in den Shownotes. Wir sehen uns in Berlin.
One of the things that you won't see in some of this material is some really racist slurs that he received, and people that were actually handing him a bag of bananas and making monkey noises. So you won't see that in all of the material, but that also happened. So very orchestrated to put a very positive picture out of China. You had the Labubu thing, of course, which went viral all over the world. And probably my pet peeve is people on LinkedIn sharing these videos that only show these very positive sides of China. The amazing skylines, the drone shows, and lately also all of the humanoid robots. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think that people should ask themselves more, well, that's really cool, a robot that can do dancing and kung fu, but is it going to do my household stuff? So I think at TechBoss China, my colleagues wrote a report where they said, well, the actual valuable robots are not the ones that have legs. So, but it looks cool. But this is the type of content that it goes viral basically, and people forward that, and lots of these people have never even been to China. And what I tend to say is, for every humanoid robot that you see in these videos, you will have 100 farmers. in Guangxi province that are still plowing the fields with a water buffalo on a very tiny piece of land, just having enough to feed themselves. So what you see in those materials is just one side of China. And really, people need to look at other parts of China. There was one guy during the TikTok refugee trend that was actually going and showing people what his life was like, which was totally different from all of the other stuff that you would see in Shenzhen and Shanghai. So this was really good. But it created a lot of these videos, but also the TikTok refugee trend creates a problem where people only see the negative sides of their own society. I mean, it happened to you as well when you came to China. Immediately afterwards, you often say, "Oh, why isn't this better arranged in Germany? And this is also much better in China." So, but there's also other sides to China which you don't see if, like on the K5 tour, we go to Beijing, Shanghai, and Hangzhou. That's why on the coming tour, where we take people that have been on the first couple of K5 tours, I'm taking them into the real countryside. I'm taking them to lower tier cities to show them a completely different side of China that you also need to know to better understand the country, because it's not just the incredibly high developed cities that we see in those videos.
Yeah, but I mean, like the underlying recommendation still stays the same. I think it's China is impressive, and you have to go see and learn. I think that's the number one thing that still holds. And but as you said, you have to be also aware of the downsides. And I think this is one of the reasons I'd like to talk to you about, and that's what we do also with you when we travel China, is to try to understand where this is all coming from. And one of the things that is really intrigued me all the time is to really understand why is retail the way it is in China, the way it is, and why we are now experiencing so many Chinese players entering the Western Hemisphere. And I think I'd like to do this and cover this mainly throughout this podcast with you. Mm-hmm. And starting off with one question I think you got from one journalist, and I'd like to rephrase it also a bit, is like, and now when we've seen like Temu and Shein coming to the West, and TikTok Shop now also being all across Europe. And you phrased it that the 4 little dragons come to China. Now you upgraded it to 5. And then the question is that it? Or will there be more people coming? And I really like to work on this throughout our conversation now. So first question is what's the upgrade? Who is the number 5? And then maybe we can look at other players showing up.
Yeah. Maybe we can take one step back. Because there's one final thing that I'd like to say about the topic of China maxing versus bashing.
Yeah.
So as I said, I think you really need to get out of the cities, and that's also why I admire out of the big cities. Why I admire Olivia so much, because she traveled to all of those 32 lower tier cities to see what the rest of China was like. So get away from the coast and go west. Go west. Maybe you can do that at KTV the next time. So you need to go into the countryside. And one of the things that I also noticed before COVID is that if you would go to Shanghai, and there were many more expats living in Shanghai than there are nowadays, and you would talk to one of those people that would work in the financial sector, and you would ask him, so have you traveled around China? So how long have you lived there? Yeah, 3 years. Have you traveled around China? And then they say, no, I've never been outside of Shanghai. And then Shanghai was their China. And they were basically just there because it looked good on their CV, and they were much more interested in the next thing. And that's just a missed opportunity. So get out of the city. Another thing that I need to mention is, if you're really interested in China, try to live there. Even if it's just for half a year or a few years. I lived in Xi'an for a few years. After I came back to the Netherlands, I've always been thinking, should I go and live in China again? And especially since I'm now fully focused on China, I used to do that part-time. it makes much more sense. And I probably won't live there the whole year, but I can see myself living half of the time in China and half of the time in the Netherlands. I think Kaiser is doing something similar, just living half of the time in China. And one thing that happened is when I mentioned on LinkedIn that I was thinking about, okay, so where would I live if I would go back? And there was one person, one of your fellow countrymen, that said, well, this is really worrying if somebody that I think was relatively intelligent is now considering to relocate to China. And then just came up with all of the regular stuff like the human rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that to me, it was just really offensive because there was somebody that had never been there, but has a certain idea about the country. I can tell you that it's not, especially if you live outside Shanghai, it's not easy to live in China, but it's incredible, fulfilling. And the years that I lived in Xi'an, I consider to be the best part of my life, the most interesting part of my life, at least. So, and that's also why I would consider maybe in the future, my parents are getting older now, so I won't go and live in China permanently. But why I would reconsider that. And it's so offensive to have people then say, yeah, but this and this and this and this. Just go there for a few days, for a week, and see it for yourself. I can remember that we had one person on the last K5 tour. And at the start of the tour, he told me, okay, I'm coming here once because I need to know this from a professional perspective, but I'm never, ever going to come here again. And I thought, well, let's see. And at the end of each tour, as you know, we have the tea session where we go to a tea house and we just discuss all of the impressions that we got. And we do a Q&A around the table. And his first reaction was, I have to come back here. I have to take my family here to see this. So he went like 180 degrees to the other side. And that's also something that the Genuine, the guys from Genuine that you had on the earlier podcast said. Everybody that goes on their tours, they simply have a very different impression about China than before. So I would challenge people to sort of put their prejudices aside and go there, try it out. Like you say, get your feet on the ground. You don't have to love it, but you will at least have a better understanding of it. So that's basically what it is.
What I keep saying to everybody is like when they come up with these prejudices and I say, have you been there? No. I mean, and then actually if you rely your experience or your knowledge basically only on Western media, I think you sorry, forgive my French, you're fucked because you know, I mean, people writing about stuff they haven't really seen and writing from other journalists they don't know and then putting out a picture of a country they haven't been to is not, I mean, a very smart way. Even if you're, I mean, for instance, if you're a business leader or a political leader, you need to understand the mechanics and see it with your own eyes. And I think that's what we try to accomplish with the tours. That's what we try to accomplish with the K5 conference, that we're bringing various perspectives on subjects that you can actually come up with your own picture. And then from there, take a much more profound decision when it comes to your business. And I think, I mean, it's in general, it's not only about China, it's also about the United States. And what the funny part is that like the outside in perspective, if you read foreign newspapers on Germany, for instance, over the last years, you get the impression, I mean, I'm living in a country where everybody gets killed on trains and it's extremely dangerous. And then I look at my life and my daily life and I feel like, I don't have any experience of like this. So yeah. These pictures get so quickly distorted that I think it's our job to invite people to change that.
Yeah. I know when I'm traveling on Deutsche Bahn, I want to kill myself sometimes, but not other people. So
yeah, that's why I never take the train anymore in Germany. Yeah. So anyway,
but the grass is not always greener on the other side. So and every country has its pros and cons. Germany does, the Netherlands does, China does.
We start there when we come back to the retail commerce side, and before I look at maybe like maybe I was just try to leapfrog a bit here, but if before we go into like the companies and I mean, maybe we can look at like what's not working in China, because that is one of the main reasons why we see so many Chinese players going abroad, right?
Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned leapfrog, because your earlier question was, why is retail the way it is in China? Why is it so innovative? That's partially because of leapfrogging. China had relatively little, especially outside the big cities, offline retail. So when e-commerce started, a lot of products all of a sudden became available in your cheap mobile phone, your cheap Chinese mobile phone that everybody could afford. Everybody could buy a Xiaomi Redmi phone, and you could buy anything that you wanted. It would just be posted to you. So that is the leapfrogging that took place in retail. Now, what we see more recently is a move the other way, where it's become so incredibly expensive for Chinese internet companies and Chinese e-commerce companies to acquire a customer online, because basically the growth of new people coming online has stagnated. It's about 80% now. It's really difficult to get that remaining 20% online, because they are elderly people that are in the countryside, maybe that might not have a computer or not even a mobile phone, and they cannot use pinyin, which is like the Romanized version with our alphabet to enter Chinese characters. So if you cannot use that, you cannot use a telephone, you cannot use a computer. At least not relatively easily. So that last 20% is very difficult to get online. Now, if you look at the 80% that are online, most of them are already shopping online. So everybody is fishing in the same pond and trying to steal each other's customers. Now, therefore, it's become really, really expensive to acquire these new customers. So what's happening is that they go offline. That's why Alibaba started Germa, Fresh Ippo supermarket, because it was easier to acquire a customer offline and then convert him to buying online within the Germa app. That's why we see JD.com starting JD malls, enormous malls of five floors with any consumer electronics product that you can imagine, from mobile phones to washing machines, specifically for shoes or for your underwear, etc. We've seen it. And that's another thing that is very difficult for us to understand. I can remember that when we were in Beijing during the last tour, and we were getting a tour around one of those JD malls, that a few of the people in the group said, "This is never going to make money. This is just such a stupid idea."
Yeah.
Because they see it as a pure offline thing. They don't see it as a customer acquisition channel to later pull people back online, which a lot of these new initiatives are. So that's why it's so enormously different. Now, the other thing is that the competition is much fiercer in China, which also makes all of these companies innovate much more and much faster. So that's why we see certain things like quick commerce, instant retail take off much faster in China with different business models than it would do here. But not everything works. Community group buying, there's only Pinduoduo, for instance, is still doing community group buying. The other companies all pulled out. There's a lot of things that these companies did in the sharing economy that were disastrous. There were a lot of new retail concepts like unmanned stores that simply didn't work in practice. So not everything works. And that's also why we keep updating the tours and also telling people, well, we had this in the last tour, that doesn't work anymore now. But now they've got this new stuff. So the stagnation also of the growth of getting people online, the economy that is not growing as fast anymore, especially the consumer economy, because after the real estate crisis and after the COVID lockdowns, people have lost a lot of confidence. So, and they are saving money instead of spending it. They are still spending. They're spending much more on experiences like travel, but they might not be buying a lot of luxury goods anymore. So there's more rational consumption, as they call it in China, instead of just splurging and buying all kinds of Gucci handbags and those kinds of things. So because of that, it's also difficult to continue to grow your GMV. Now, Alibaba just yesterday published their results, and their e-commerce business is growing 6%, but they've invested enormous amount last year in instant retail. But the market is growing. It's at roughly the same percentage. So despite all of those enormous investments, they just need to do that to keep up with the regular market growth within online retail. So, and that's one of the reasons, or some of the reasons, why most of these companies, or more and more of those companies, have started to go abroad, or Shanghai as they call that, and go to Western markets. Because in Western markets, it's cheaper to get a new customer. They see several countries also around the world that look a lot like China looked 10, 15 years ago. And they have a very good proposition, because even with higher margins than in China, they are still cheaper in Europe and the US than local platforms and companies like Amazon. So they have a very good proposition, and can continue to grow and also keep their shareholders happy. So that's basically the main reasons.
Yeah, so you have a lot of pressure on the home market. It's a bit like you squeeze a balloon, right? And the air has to go somewhere. And I think that made them actually jump abroad. And interestingly enough, and I think that we cannot stress that enough as well, is that the competition, as you described, among themselves is on an unimaginable level to me, because everybody starts businesses which are not in their core business, just to compete with the competition, right? And that's like so you never are sure within the market you are in and the position you have, because everybody is trying to steal away your customer. Because what the Chinese actually understand and do is that attracting, as you described, a customer in instant retail actually brings this person into my completely digital ecosystem.
Yeah, and that's that thing that you described is also something that we talk about a lot during the study tours, is the diversification that takes place with these companies. You might do e-commerce, but hey, look, this other company in the market is doing food delivery. Oh, I think I can also do that. And then the food delivery company says, oh, but then I can start doing instant retail and become your competitor. So these companies start to become more and more alike, because they need to continue to find new business units, because if they don't do what you are doing, you will do what I am doing tomorrow. So, and that's why there's always enormous battles and also price battles taking place in China, and which makes it very, very interesting for me to continue to write about, because it's never a dull moment in the internet space in China.
Yeah, and it's never going to stop. And that was my leapfrogging question, was that, I mean, now we have the four little dragons, right? It's like Alibaba with AliExpress, Shein, Pinduoduo with Temu, and we have ByteDance with TikTok, and Douyin in the home market. But there is a fifth dragon now, quite active actually. And we were very fortunate, and we have been visiting them twice on the tours. I mean, can you disclose who it is and what's more?
So the fifth new dragon is Jingdong's, JD.com's Joybuy, which officially launched on Monday. It had already been in beta mode since August in the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, France, and Germany, and in the UK since about this time last year. And before that, in all of these countries, except for the UK, they were already active with a platform called Ochama, which started as like robot pickup stores, but very soon became more like a store for the Asian diaspora, because they were especially popular among them because they had a lot of Asian food. But also were specifically also active on WeChat and didn't do their marketing very well to sort of the local people, so to speak. So that's the new party that has entered the market, or that has officially now entered the market with Joybuy.
But I mean, when one follows you, and I just read, I mean, you are a bit more critical than the rest of the experts, and actually, and yeah, I hope not too much, because I tried to get JD on stage for K5. But anyhow, I mean, but you're also looking at a completely different direction, and one topic we already have covered on various opportunities. But JD is also still bidding for the economy part, the Media Saturn, and this is, I think, much more relevant from your perspective.
Yeah, correct. So yeah, the thing both with Ochama and Joybuy now is the front end, especially in Germany, France, and in the Netherlands, where it's not in English, is not up to their own standards, as I consider it. I mean, within China, they are like the most respected e-commerce player, and people say if you want something fast and if you want it reliable and you want to avoid buying shoddy fake goods, then just buy it on JD. They're a reliable party. And I don't see that coming across in Joybuy. And that's why I'm so critical, because especially if you've been active with Ochama for 3.5 years and already were running Joybuy in beta for a year, there's no excuse for putting up something that is that disrespectful to your potential customers. So that's basically my, in a nutshell, why I'm so critical about what they're doing. They really should up their game and do better localization and respect their customers with just normal language on your website. Now, this economy part is much more interesting, because there they will buy an existing distribution channel with Saturn and MediaMarkt, with existing stores, locations, existing customers, existing online channels. And they will probably just, for a long time, keep it under those existing brands. It would be really silly if they would rebrand it to Joybuy. I think they're also in the agreement they have, they said that they won't do that, at least for a number of years. So they can hit the ground running. And why are they so interested in doing this? Because one of the goals of JD, something that Richard Liu has mentioned in China, is he wants to take 1,000 Chinese brands to the global market. And those are mostly consumer electronic brands. And some of them are even their own private labels. Now, you can try to push that in a brand new channel like Joybuy, where you have to build up the brand awareness. But that's going to be a lot easier if you do that in an existing channel. So that's why I expect more from their acquisition of Ceconomy than from Joybuy. But they will have sort of like two different strategies going on at the same time. And maybe they will even try, as they do in China, what they call horse racing. Just let these two channels compete with each other to see what works best. That's a very normal corporative culture strategy that they often have in China.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm also on this economy bandwagon. I wrote a piece also on it, and I said, like, I'm not so sure if that's so super clever to let the Chinese take over more or less like a critical infrastructure from a German point of view. And I know we are like a free country and we try to live like in a liberal society, but still, I mean, there are some repercussions to this, and I think the question is, and I as I said, is there more to come? And when I look through my very limited expertise and scope on China and the way I experienced it during the last two trips, I fear actually that there is more, because I mean it's one thing is the speed, the other thing is the ambition, the strategic courage, and also the monetary firepower these companies have. So so is there more?
There is always more, but it's not necessarily in web shops. So that was indeed a question that a journalist asked me this week. So in the Netherlands, we have AliExpress, we have Shein, we have Temu. We don't have TikTok Shop yet. So that's you guys in Germany already have that. We don't have that yet. But now we have Joybuy. Now, the first four were called the four little dragons that go overseas in China. And Joybuy is going to be like the fifth one. So in the Netherlands, we will definitely have TikTok as well. And then we'll have 5. In Germany, now basically you already have 5. Then the question is there more to come? Now, what you always should do in such a case is just follow the breadcrumbs back to China and see what the Chinese e-commerce market is like. Because as I explained, it's the Chinese e-commerce companies that are going abroad. Because they don't grow that fast anymore in China. Now, if you look at the top e-commerce players, the first one is Alibaba. Now, they're here with AliExpress. They are here already for 15 years. AliExpress is not as big as it could have been, basically because AliExpress wasn't a very high priority within the total Alibaba group. That's the disadvantage to AliExpress compared to, for instance, a Temu, because a Pinduoduo, PDD Holdings company, only has 3 really big divisions. So they can put a lot of focus and a lot of effort on that. The second company is Pinduoduo with Temu. Now, we've seen what they've done over the course of 3-4 years and how big they are. And as I also explained at the K5 conference, I think that they are going to be the biggest e-commerce company in Europe. And that will make, together with being number 2 in America and number 2 in China, that will make PDD Holdings the biggest e-commerce company in the world. Number 3 is in China, Douyin by ByteDance, that we know as TikTok Shop. So again, already active in some markets, and ByteDance has a lot of capital to also invest in TikTok Shop going abroad. Very different types of products, much more focused on apparel, on beauty care, etc., etc. So a very different product palette than you would see on Temu and AliExpress. Number 4 in the Chinese market is Jingdong. Jingdong used to be number 2, but has been overtaken by Douyin and Pinduoduo, so it's now number 4. But as a retailer, they're still the biggest retailer because the other ones are basically marketplaces. Now, that's Joybuy that has now arrived in our markets. Then, after that, you have Vipshop. Vipshop, the jump from JD to Vipshop is an enormous one. Vipshop is a relatively small player compared to the top 4. And I don't see them, they have difficulties in keeping their head up in China, so I don't see them coming abroad. Then after that, you have Xiaohongshu, which we talked about, RedNote. Their e-commerce is also relatively limited in China because most users of Xiaohongshu, they do their product research on Xiaohongshu. They look at a lot of peer reviews and then they go and buy it on Tmall or Taobao or on one of the other platforms. So Xiaohongshu is working very hard to try and keep that e-commerce business inside their apps. But it's not easy. And after that, you have WeChat. Now, WeChat by Tencent has never been very active in e-commerce themselves as a self-operated business. They even sold all of their e-commerce business maybe 10 years ago to Jingdong, to JD. But what they are trying to do now is within WeChat channels, which is basically like their sort of TikTok inside WeChat, but also with WeChat stores to create an ecosystem where they will help merchants sell in stores inside WeChat. Now, they won't be selling those things themselves, but they will take probably a commission, even if it's just a payment commission, because people will be paying with WeChat Pay. Now, so therefore, I don't see, and on top of that, by the way, you have Shein, and people always ask me, why isn't Shein in this list? Because Shein isn't active in the Chinese market. So with the top 4 plus Shein, that's only, I think, the companies that we should expect, at least in the current situation, to come to foreign markets.
I have a different perspective on it, but I will share it at the end.
Yeah. So I don't see WeChat, Vipshop, and Xiaohongshu coming to our market any time soon. However, I don't know if you want to give you a different perspective now, because what I'm about to say is more other business sectors.
I know. I just wanted to point out that I just stumbled across the AI initiative of Tencent. and Pony Ma, he just said that our highly resilient core business provide us with the revenues to fund like our investments into AI. And I think that with AI, I think like an ecosystem like WeChat creates completely new opportunities for shopping within their realm, and I don't know what this is going to be, but I think, I mean, I'm using WeChat because now we're traveling back and forth to China, and that's the best way to communicate with the business partners. So I understand now more and more about the depth of this ecosystem. So that's just one bet I wouldn't put off in the future to come, but I go along with your.
I agree, but that would be for growth of their e-commerce business that it takes place within their ecosystem in China. Yeah. But even then, I don't expect Tencent to go abroad with a cross-border e-commerce platform like the other 5 little dragons have done. I don't see them doing that in the short term. I mean, they've tried also to launch WeChat about 10 years ago, and it was a complete disaster. Because all of the things that make WeChat so useful in China were not in the international version. So you just had a very strange version of WhatsApp, basically. So that didn't happen, even though they had Lionel Messi as a person promoting their app. So, but you're right. AI will definitely change a lot of things. Also, we see Alibaba making AI agents and experimenting with that. So that will change what the landscape looks like in China. But the current landscape, I don't see any of the other parties coming to us with cross-border e-commerce. But as I said, that is e-commerce. But there are other companies, like for instance, a Meituan. They don't really do a lot of e-commerce. They do instant retail. So they are doing grocery e-commerce from warehouses in the cities. They are also working with Lightning warehouses, which are sort of dark stores run by independent or franchisees, entrepreneurs. And they also deliver from physical stores, where they basically are the platform where a retailer can upload his SKUs. And then Meituan will come and pick it up and deliver it. Also, they have the couriers as well. So that's a very big business in China. And that is starting to also go abroad. Under the name Kita, Meituan has exported their food delivery business to Hong Kong, to the Gulf states in the Middle East, and also to Brazil. Now, I know that they've have taken a look at the UK and Germany as well. For now, they've basically concluded, first, let's try some markets that are more like China 15 years ago, instead of going into Europe, which is much more difficult. But I don't rule out that they might also become active in our markets. What they've even started to do, and I think it was in Saudi Arabia, is they've also started the grocery delivery business there. So that's not so much e-commerce, but that's much more related to quick commerce, to meal delivery, to instant retail. Another thing that is taking place is that some of the catering companies that are also highly digitized in China, so are sometimes even described as internet companies if you don't look too close at what product they're selling, they are also going abroad. Like Luckin Coffee and Coty Coffee are two very big coffee chains in China. Luckin has more than 30,000 stores. Coty has about half of it. Ironically, Coty is like a spin-off of Luckin Coffee by the original founders that had committed fraud and were kicked out by the investors. But you have those. You have Mixue, which has 45,000 stores worldwide. They're bigger than McDonald's. And you have Chaji, which is making milk tea. And those are also going abroad, normally first to Southeast Asia, but they are already opening stores in the US. And Coty Coffee even has opened now 2 stores in Germany. So I can see these caterers, which have business models that are very different from, for instance, from a Starbucks. Starbucks is about third place. You go and you hang out and you lounge at Starbucks, or even have a meeting there with friends. Whereas Luckin is a very small store, and it's much more about pickup coffee. It's much more on the go. But by doing that, they can also offer much lower prices, about half the prices that Starbucks has. And I can see those kinds of concepts now coming to our markets. So just as we've seen in other business sectors, like in new energy, EVs, etc., the Chinese also with internet companies or businesses that are highly digitized via internet will also come to our markets.
Okay, so what you described is actually counterintuitive a bit to the common perspective that these Chinese cross-border models do have like a process knowledge gap when it comes to Western markets. Obviously, which is not the case. I mean, you described Ochama and that there were some fails, but still, I mean, seem to do a pretty good job in adapting to markets like Brazil, and I think like a coffee chain looks more or less the same in the Western markets than it does in the Chinese market. I mean, my perception was that I mean, if you would ask me beforehand, before I traveled to China, I would say that the Chinese don't drink coffee, they drink tea. But I mean, but they also like hot water and they drink hot soup. So it's just the substance that changed. So it's always like this trial and error thing. So would it be too bold to put out the statement, also actually deriving from you that there is a fair chance that most of retail will be owned or ruled by the Chinese in a couple of decades?
Yeah, well, I shocked a journalist that came and had coffee at my place a while ago by saying that. The reason why I say that is because if you look at what's happening now in China, is the supermarket sector was extremely fragmented because most of the supermarket chains were provincial chains. And then you had like a handful of supermarkets that were active across different provinces, like Yonghui, but also Walmart. Walmart is doing with Sam's Club really well in China. But all of the other ones were very splintered and fragmented. And what has happened now is, as I described, because these Chinese internet companies are going offline, they are all opening upmarket supermarket stores. They are opening dark stores from which they deliver fresh groceries. They are also opening, which is also relatively new in the Chinese market, discount stores, which would be like Lidl or Aldi. So Meituan is opening Kuai Lego, Happy Monkey, but also Xiaoxiang, Little Elephant supermarket. JD is opening discount stores. Alibaba has Germa, both as Germa, the upmarket store, but also Chaogesuan, which is also a discount store. So these internet companies are taking over the supermarket sector. If you look at the top 10 of supermarket chains, half of it is basically already run by internet companies. Now, because they have such enormous cash reserves, I can imagine somewhere down the line that they will also, just like they do with e-commerce, expand into different countries. And then it's going to be very hard to compete with that because they have a strategy of just subsidizing the prices to get customers aboard, drive out local competition, and then after that, raise the prices again. There is no regulation, I think, that can stop that, doing that. So if I would have to advise the EU, I would say, if you really want to protect yourself against China, start looking at maybe legislation that is prohibiting selling under cost price. I know that Belgium has certain laws like that, but that would stop the regular strategy that China has. But I can imagine a scenario that maybe in 10, 20, however many years, the main supermarkets here in Europe are all run by Chinese internet companies. I don't rule that out. I think that's a possible scenario. Yeah.
And I think, I mean, I really, I go along with this scenario because here it feels like there is some juggernauts with actually governmental support going global and competing against our setup, which is like the government lets you alone and doesn't really do much stopping the foreign competition, playing with basically really foul tricks. I mean, and as you said, and it's not the de minimis, right? And it's not it's more like that they can subsidize their business. It's basically the way Amazon built their retail businesses, also by using the funds they generated from other parts of their conglomerate to then also subsidize their retail business. So I mean that's nothing new from the Chinese side. It's all over the place. And so to me, I was always like, where I'm a bit like jealous and envious when I look at the Chinese market is that you know, everybody seems to have a long-term vision and a long-term plan. And I know I stress that a lot with Kaiser, but what do you think is the difference when you look at how these companies are you know, pulling off their strategy?
Yeah. So first off, there's the need. They need to do this because of the limited growth in the market. Another big difference is that we were talking about cash reserves, but these companies, they have up to 1 billion customers in China, and if they are doing very well, their cash reserves are enormous, sometimes bigger than any other Western company in the retail market. So. And they also are more open to experimenting. So we'll just throw some money at Europe in a concept called Ochama, and if that doesn't take off, well, we're going to try again 4 years later with Joybuy. Stuff like that. And of course, not everything succeeds. When we talk about TikTok Shop, there's a lot of other different websites that I've shown also during the tour, during the masterclasses, that we don't even know about, that ByteDance has tried in the European market. And they were all Shein clones, but they didn't catch on. So they do try and experiment a lot better. Now, one of the things that might be working in their advance, which is also related to why I'm maybe very critical about Joybuy, is that they also have a cultural concept that's called chabudo. Chabudo basically means almost. It's good enough. It's like a minimum viable product, but not quite. It's not there yet, but speed is more important. So we'll just launch it, and we'll see if it catches on, because it's more important to be online and live than being perfect, because one of our other competitors, Chinese competitors, is going to be the first one. So, and then it becomes a question of, if this starts to catch on, then you need to very quickly improve on what you're doing. Now, a very good example of that is Temu. If you were looking at the first couple of versions of Temu and the website, it was also very dodgy. I use the English version of Temu, but I've been told this week that their Dutch version also has very strange language. But people sort of take it for granted because they know it's a web shop with cheap stuff, something that you wouldn't get away with if you shouldn't get away with if you are Joybuy. But they very quickly bought market share by subsidizing, and then, as I also said during some of the K5 presentations, it's like buying a ticket or getting on the bus and buying the ticket later. Now that they are pressured, both by regulations, but also because they are not fully, they have at least not been fully compliant, they start fixing the problems, but they already have the market share. So it's the speed is quite often more important than being fully compliant and maybe perfect in what you're doing. So that's also very different from what we would do. As I was saying in an article this week, when I was still working at retail companies and we would launch a new platform, we would make damn sure that we have tested every little aspect on the staging server before it would go live, because you only have one chance to make a good impression. And for some of these Chinese companies, that's not the most important thing. Speed is faster, and they'll just throw a lot of cash at it to buy market share and fix the problems later.
Yeah. this says fail fast, fail cheap approach, and I really think it's a different kind of animal when you look at the way Chinese entrepreneurs run their businesses. I mean, it's always like when you work with people at, for instance, Alibaba, and you check in on them again before the conference, they say like, yeah, but my area has changed, and I'm now responsible for this and that, and I think that at the speed and how fast they're changing jobs and how they're restructuring their businesses is unseen in the West, and they do it on purpose to keep these enormous organizations at speed, right?
Yeah. So that's also very frustrating, because you spend a lot of time building what they call this guanxi, like the relationships with these people. And then when we come over with a tour, you contact them and say, "Oh, I've changed jobs, or I'm now not working for Alibaba anymore. I'm working for Douyin." Oh, that's interesting. Maybe we can go there. So it's especially in Alibaba. Alibaba reorganizes about like every 9 months. They completely reshuffle business units and different initiatives. Something that's also very common in Chinese companies is that people don't call themselves, they don't use their real names, but they use nicknames. Also to make it very opaque who these people actually are, and thereby it will be very difficult for competitors to poach them, to have a headhunter call them. And so I've heard many different people from many different companies say to me, you cannot get the organogram, the organizational chart. It's impossible to get that. And at Pinduoduo, I don't even know who the people are that are sitting next to me. They probably work for a different division. They're not my direct colleagues. I don't even know the direct colleagues that I communicate with. I haven't even seen them. So they structure this whole thing very differently in Chinese companies.
Okay, so I mean, like, to close off, maybe on a positive note, is the question is how you can actually tackle this challenge from a Western perspective. I know your expertise lies on the east side, on the Chinese market, but like, how would you go along and how would move forward with the knowledge you have, and you were in charge of a company in the retail commerce space? Is there, like, what's the recommendation, or how would you go, move forward?
Yeah, well, there's basically two things that I always say when I get asked this question. First of all, is try to figure out what your USPs are, and it's not price, because you won't be able to compete with the customers on price. Brand is also getting difficult because the Chinese are also going abroad with very high quality, low priced products nowadays. So, but you are local. So what still a lot of these companies are doing not so well, and we see that with Joybuy, is localization. You might also be better equipped to provide service and advice and those kinds of things. So try to figure out what still makes you unique compared to those other platforms and build on that. But at the same time, be aware that those things that these companies are not so good at, they will become very good at as well. Now, an example is that 10 years ago, nobody in these Chinese internet companies was thinking about loyalty and retention of customers, because there were so many new people coming into the market. But now all of these companies have loyalty programs and retention strategies, et cetera, et cetera. So the same way, they're also upgrading the service to their customers in very different ways. So it's not something that is a standstill. It's just a snapshot at the moment, but expect the Chinese to also become better in that. The other thing that I always advise people to do, which is much more related to my own business, is step away from the prejudices, because a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to China because of the human rights or whatever. But you're really putting yourself as a disadvantage. You don't have to like it, but you have to understand it better. You have to know it. So study it better. I mean, even if you're not a paid subscriber, follow China Digital Retail Report, and you get a lot of free stuff also, which learns you much more about the Chinese companies that you're up against. Go on one of the study tours, go to the K5 conference and watch. I think you've got a very substantial part of the conference dedicated also to China now.
Yeah.
Gain that competitive intelligence. And sometimes even you can come up with new ideas, although it's very difficult to copy these concepts to Europe. It helps you also to think outside of the box. But the most important thing is you need to realize who your competitors are. And that's why I keep saying that if you know yourself, and that's what a quote by Sun Tzu, if you know yourself and you know your enemy, you don't have to fear all of the battles that you need to fight. But we hardly know ourselves compared to the Chinese often. And we don't know the Chinese. So that's why we are constantly surprised by what we are doing. Because we underestimate what they are doing. And at the same time, the Chinese study us meticulously. So they know, even though they might not be able to always completely localize, they know us much better than we do. We know them.
Yeah, and I think I mean, like it's a saying like hold your friends close, hold your enemies closer. And when you read one of the books I really liked, it was the Seeing the Unseen, where you really get an understanding of how entrepreneurs are like trained also to look at in a very militaristic way to look at markets and strategies, and I think that's what's missing at our part. So again, thank you so much. We didn't even cover to dive more deeper into something like the Temu strategy, but we can do that most definitely maybe in a second episode, and most definitely we will get a real life experience with you at the K5 conference on June 23rd. You'll be on stage on the first day, so I'm really looking forward. Ed, thank you so much for being here on the show.
Thanks for having me, Sven.
Vielen Dank fürs Zuhören. Und wenn du tiefer einsteigen möchtest, werde einfach Teil der K5-Community. Abonniere diesen Podcast, lass gerne eine 5-Sterne-Bewertung da und vernetze dich mit mir auf LinkedIn. Ich bin Sven Rittau und denk dran, wo wir sind, ist vorne. Bleibt mutig, bleibt strategisch.